What is up, my beautiful gemstones? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, just welcome. My name is Gemma Jade, but today we are going to be discussing thwarted abduction attempts. Now, we've discussed all different types of alien abductions here on this channel, and most of us know by now that there's really nothing uniform about them from one to the next, until I started talking to a friend of mine about something that happened to him, which he hasn't yet given me full permission to share on my channel yet. It never occurred to me that when an extraterrestrial or otherworldly entity tries to abduct a human being, that they wouldn't be like the Texas Rangers or the Canadian Mounties, as in they always get their man, right? I never even thought that it would be possible for an entity to try to abduct a human being and for them to end up being thwarted in any possible way. But once the idea occurred to me, I was fascinated and I had to look more into it. And of course, to bring you gemstones along for the ride with me, whether it be by misstep, bad luck, other forces of fate or chance, or something else altogether, it seems as though sometimes aliens actually do fail in their attempts to take us. It doesn't happen often, and when it does happen, it would certainly be considered a rare case. So I figured we could discuss some of the times I've found in my research that this has happened with you all here today. Then at the end, I got a little something extra for y'all. So let's just jump right in. On September 4th, 1964, a 28-year-old man named Donald Shrum and some of his friends went bow hunting in Cisco Grove, Placer County, California. And somehow, at some point, Donald had become inadvertently separated from his group. It was almost fully dark outside, and the men were having this little adventure in the middle of the woods. So Donald decided it would be best to just hunker down inside of a tree for the night, figuring he would just catch up with his friends the following morning so they can continue on their bow hunting adventure. He started drifting from half sleep to half awake daydreams and back again, and was having a very hard time either falling asleep or staying awake. He was kind of kept in this perpetual middle place of daydream, I guess you could say. Suddenly, though, he was snapped out of it when he saw a dazzling and bright white light zigzagging through the darkness and the trees surrounding him. At first, he thought it was a helicopter, and although he couldn't imagine why one would be right there just then, in that place at that time, he wasn't really scared about it. However, once the mysterious light started slowly coming towards him, and then as it started hovering in the sky almost directly above the tree he was trying to sleep in, those sentiments changed drastically. He was scared and he didn't know what was happening, but because of how silent the light was, or whatever the light was attached to was, I should say, he knew for sure it wasn't a helicopter or aircraft of any kind that he had ever seen before or was familiar with. He tried his best to stay still and to stay silent, hoping that whatever was piloting the craft attached to the light, which he knew had to be there but also couldn't see, wouldn't notice he was there. He quickly realized, though, that whatever it was had noticed him, and when he looked down onto the ground below the tree, he saw three strange-looking beings approaching him. He described two of the beings as humanoid in general shape, but the third one, he would explain, looked like some sort of outlandish and very bizarre-looking robot. The beings started to shake the tree almost ferociously and with great force as the terrified Donald tried his best to hold on and keep his eyes on the creatures below him. He knew right away that they were trying to dislodge him from where he was and they were trying to get him to drop to the ground. As he watched, the robot started sputtering something that looked like white steam from its mouth, and then suddenly Donald was unconscious. He fell fast and deeply asleep. He woke up a few minutes later and realized that these creatures were still trying to get him out of the tree and that they hadn't succeeded yet, despite having been successful at knocking him out for a little while. He didn't know what to do, and he really didn't have much recourse against this strange and bizarre attack. So he did the only thing he really could think to do, and that was dropping lit matches on top of the attackers. This only caused them to back up a bit and only for a few seconds before they went right back to their efforts at trying to get him out of that tree. He then remembered he had a weapon on him, and so he started shooting at them with his bow. He noticed that the arrows he was shooting at them caused sparks to shoot out of the top of the robot-looking entity's head as they hit and bounced off of it. As time passed, more and more of those robot creatures appeared, and the humanoid-looking entities were trying unsuccessfully to crawl up the tree towards him. So not trying to climb it, to crawl or like shimmy up. That is really creepy when you think about it in your head. Donald said he shot arrows at them until he didn't have any left, and then he just threw anything he had on him or near him that he could think of at them in the hopes of getting them to leave him alone. There was a point when he was gassed again by the white mist stuff from the robot's mouth, but when he snapped out of it once again, he saw that the creatures were still desperately trying to get to him. This went on until the sun started to rise, and then they just stopped trying to get him, and they left him alone. Later on, his companions asked him if he had seen the strange lights in the sky shooting and zipping around the forest all night long. They wholeheartedly believed Donald's story and said it wasn't something he would lie about, and he wasn't known to be a fibber. All right, guys, can you even imagine the actual terror you would feel if you had been in Donald's shoes? I keep getting goosebumps, and I kept getting them as I went through this information. And also, I just kept wondering what would have happened to and become of him had he not had the presence of mind in the first place to decide to sleep in the tree. What if he had decided to sleep under it instead on the ground? They would have had full access to him, and who knows what their intentions were. Have you guys ever heard of anything like this? What do you think you guys would have done? Let me know in the comments below, please, and let's move on. On November 2nd, 1967, near a town called Riri, Idaho, two Native American men named Guy Twossie and Will Begay were driving south on Highway 26 when they had their own harrowing, almost abduction encounter. The men saw a glowing dome-shaped object appear in front of their vehicle in a sudden flash of light. It was about 8 feet wide, and there were humanoid entities of some sort inside of the dome, which was transparent. They looked at everything around them in shock and some astonishment, and their car suddenly came to a stop, stalling out as the engine seemingly died for no reason, leaving them with no way to get away from whatever was happening and unfolding before them. One of the hinges on the bizarre-looking dome-shaped craft opened up, and then one of the entities that had been inside of it exited and floated itself down to the ground. It had completely defied gravity, and the witnesses saw that it was approximately 3 feet tall, had large black eyes, and a bulbous head. They were more than a little terrified, obviously. The creature then walked confidently right up to the car and let itself inside with them, taking a seat right behind the steering wheel and pushing whoever was driving over to the side and out of the way so that it could sit at the steering wheel instead. Once the being had the wheel, the car suddenly started up again, and it began to slowly drive right towards the craft it had just come from, as the other two beings inside looked on and watched. The craft was hovering about 5 feet above the ground, and suddenly the vehicle veered off to the side of the road and into a large wheat field, and the dome-shaped object/craft started slowly following it, presumably trying to get into a position of hovering over the vehicle with the men and the other entity inside of it. When the car finally came to an abrupt stop in the field, Guy made a break for it. He opened the door, ran out into the night, and was shouting for help. I can imagine it in my head. He headed for the only farmhouse that he could see nearby. The farmhouse was owned by a local man named Willard Hammond. The UFO followed Guy almost the entire way, but once he actually reached Willard's house, the craft backed off and started heading back to the field where the car was. All the while, Will Begay was still in the car with the being who was still behind the wheel. The being turned to look at him and started to, quote, curse him out, end quote, or so he thought, because that's what the barrage of angry-sounding bird-like noises it let out towards him sounded like to him. It then stormed out of the car, floated back up into the craft, and then the craft zigzagged off into the night sky. Guy brought the farmer back to Will, who was astonished and traumatized, still sitting in the exact same spot in the vehicle, almost unblinking and unmoving, not knowing what to do next. Will and Guy filed a police report, and at first the authorities didn't take what they had to say seriously at all. However, there were reports from other witnesses that began to pour into the station about people saying they had seen strange lights in the sky, and that many of them had livestock that had been acting bizarrely in response to the lights and possibly to something else. Both of our witnesses insist to this day that those were aliens and that they were trying to abduct them. They believe that Guy running to go and get help more than likely saved them from whatever their fate otherwise would have been had they been successfully abducted. This is another one where I just cannot imagine how in the world I would react to something like this. And in all the information that I had about this case, I haven't found anything about what the farmer, Willard Hammond, thought about all of it or if he saw anything. I did look, but I think he believed because he did go out to assist and help them, so he had to have seen something. In 1973, a masseuse at the Swedish sauna in Manchester, England, named Linda Morell had finished up a late shift on the night of November 2nd, and she was driving home to the nearby town of Goffstown at around 2:45 in the morning. Her house in Goffstown was about 8 miles from her job in Manchester, so it wasn't a very long way for her to have to travel, especially not at that late hour. There wasn't traffic or anything. As she drove, she kept on seeing an intermittent flash of light that switched colors between yellow, red, blue, and green, which she said she at first thought was an aircraft or a planet. Eventually, though, she saw it closer and noticed it was a very large and glowing orb covered in hexagonal shapes. She described it as being, quote, like a honeycomb, end quote, and she said once it got very close to her, her head had been invaded by some sort of high-pitched squealing sound, and she noticed she couldn't remove her hands from the steering wheel no matter how hard she tried. Her vehicle began to move itself towards the glowing object, which she could see, quote, a smallish humanoid figure standing behind a console of some sort, end quote, inside the object. She said that the being was trying to send her some sort of telepathic message telling her to calm down and not to be afraid. Suddenly, Linda felt warm and calm, and she was overwhelmed by a sleepiness she couldn't resist. However, she did somehow resist it and snap herself out of it. And she did so seemingly just in the nick of time. She managed to regain control of her vehicle, and she veered off the course she was on, speeding towards a nearby house. She made it to the house, stopped the car, got out, and ran to the residence, pounding on the door, even as, the whole time, the UFO was still within sight and hovering nearby, watching her. It was watching her, and the high-pitched squealing was still assaulting her ears. The residents of the house opened the door and saw this terrified woman standing out there, looking desperately and pleading with them for help, so they let her come inside and called the police. As soon as she stepped foot inside the house, the craft shot off into the night sky and disappeared. So with this next case, I wasn't too sure of whether or not it actually was an attempted abduction, though I really believe the ones we've discussed so far definitely were, but I included it here anyway to see what you guys all think about it. Let me know in the comments if you think this one was, in fact, a thwarted abduction attempt. Regardless of what you think about that, I do believe you'll all see how spectacularly fascinating this one is anyway. On November 6, 1977, at the Ellsworth Air Force Base in South Dakota, a security alarm was received. This resulted in A1C Jenkins and A1C Rake being dispatched to investigate what the disturbance was. When they arrived at the location of the alarm, they saw a very bright light hovering above the fence line. Rake went to see what was going on, and he climbed down the low hill towards the light. He couldn't believe his eyes when he saw what he described as, quote, an individual dressed in a glowing green metallic uniform and wearing a helmet with a visor, end quote, whom he yelled at to stop, halt, and surrender. The trespasser ignored his commands completely, and this forced Rake to aim his weapon at it, which was an M16. He once again ordered the strange intruder to stop and surrender as he looked at it through the lens of the firearm. The humanoid figure then turned and pointed something at the weapon, sending something that looked like a laser beam to absolutely disintegrate the M16 in Rake's hands. His hands were severely burned from whatever it was, and he was more terrified than he had ever been in his entire life. Rake immediately ran for cover and to call for backup, as he obviously took the blowing up of his weapon as a definite sign of aggression and hostility, and that he was dealing with something not only super dangerous, but also hostile. Jenkins watched the whole thing happen to his partner in horror, and as Rake called for assistance, Jenkins said that he saw 2 additional figures approaching the first one, and he ordered them to halt, stop, and surrender. They didn't even seem to have heard him and started coming directly towards him, and so he thought he had no choice but to fire off a couple of rounds from his own weapon. One of the bullets struck one of the intruders in the chest, while the other one hit the companion in the helmet. This didn't deter them in any way, and one of them emitted a beam from an object in its hand, and luckily Jenkins, having seen what just happened to his partner, managed to dodge the beam and take cover just in time before it hit him. The 2 intruders he had just fired at had fired on him in kind, and they were then seen turning and walking away directly towards and getting into a disc-shaped craft that measured about 20 feet in diameter, and then they sped off into the night. They didn't run away. They weren't scared. They just walked off. I guess the other intruder went with them because there's no mention of it staying behind, meaning the one who shot the M16 out of Rake's hand to begin with. Rake would later be found to have suffered 2nd and 3rd degree burns to his hands, severe ones, as well as small levels of radiation being found throughout his body. So, do you guys think that these things were looking to abduct these men? I don't think so, because it doesn't seem like they were looking for them specifically, but it does concern me that they had these high-powered laser weapons that seemingly could disintegrate one of our own weapons into nothing while causing extreme harm and damage to a human being in the process. What were they out there looking for at one of our military bases? I don't necessarily believe they were hostile, but that's up for debate. In my opinion, and what I've come to understand throughout all of my research, is that most, not all, but most extraterrestrials don't play about themselves. So even if they come in peace, if they're fired on or feel attacked in any way, they will retaliate mercilessly, as we've recently seen when I covered encounters with UFOs on battlefields. Our next witness is someone who wants to remain anonymous, so I'm just going to call him Stan. Stan said he had a very strange and almost unreal experience one night while driving home from work in some unnamed rural area of California in the United States. His car radio started going crazy and became annoyingly fuzzy and shrieky, and his engine stalled immediately after. As he sat there looking around, wondering what in the world just happened and what he was going to do about it, he saw a glowing disc that was around 50 feet in diameter that randomly appeared seemingly out of the darkness of the night from somewhere, somehow. I don't think he saw it coming by the way it was explained, and it seemed more like it was kind of just there, not there 1 minute and then there the next minute. Once he noticed the object, he felt numb and paralyzed, unable to move or really even able to think too clearly. Suddenly, there was a flash of light, and with it came him being inexplicably outside of his vehicle without having moved at all. Remember, he had just been rendered unable to move, and then suddenly, in the blink of an eye and with the bright flash of some random light, he was outside of his vehicle looking around, very scared and very confused, I'm sure. Not only was he outside of his vehicle, though, but he was being dragged towards the disc-shaped object by two strange-looking entities with slim bodies and large heads. I'll let him tell you the rest of it. So he said, quote, "One of these things was doing most of the dragging while the other had some sort of device trained on me. I had the suspicion that this was what was keeping me paralyzed and under control, and then something funny happened. I suddenly felt sensation returning to my limbs, and this creature looked surprised. It then started inspecting its device, and I kid you not, it actually smacked its hand against it like you might do with a wonky remote control. I used this moment to kick out at them, knocking one to the ground, and then I ran back to my car. The two creatures then seemed to have given up. They just looked at me, went into their UFO, and sped off into the night. Although I was terrified at the time, in retrospect, it is kind of funny that an alien should have an equipment malfunction like that." End quote. First of all, guys, this guy is my people. He's literally almost abducted and taken to God knows where in the middle of the night by two alien creatures, and in hindsight, he thinks it's funny. I love it. I love that. However, let's talk about and break down what really happened for a minute. Now, I've come across and I've even reported on some incidents where there seems to have been some sort of malfunction with either a craft or something else involving an extraterrestrial or two, and they've had to either ask a human being for help or compel a human being to help, but it doesn't happen very often. Once I found a case where the aliens went to the guy and asked to borrow his wrench, though I don't think it went that smoothly or that they used our language, and the guy said they did something that looked like they were repairing their ship and then took off into the sky and into the night without ever returning the wrench. There are a few more too that I just can't think of off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure I covered all of them here at some point or another. I honestly think that the extraterrestrials in this thwarted abduction knew that this witness wasn't going to go with them willingly and did in fact give up when they realized they would no longer be able to keep him subdued with their little machine that it was whacking against its hand. It is funny if you think about it. Not only that, but there are a lot of races of ETs out there who are non-violent, and they don't consider what they do to us, meaning the experiments, as violent at all, and they look at it as scientific in nature. They don't understand that to us it's torture. Now, that isn't across the board, and some know for sure that what they're doing and that it's akin to torture, and they just don't care. But my point here is maybe they weren't willing or able to fight back, and when the man was seemingly becoming violent, they thought perhaps it wasn't worth it. So those are about all of the thwarted abduction attempts that I could find for now, and as usual, I wanted to make this video a little longer. A few months ago, I talked with you all about the abduction of Betty and Barney Hill, but I didn't get into any sort of tremendous detail when I did so, only because there was so much information and almost every single article on the subject said something different, and it was very hard to decipher what was absolute fact and truth, what was complete and total fiction, and what was something in between where the truth more than likely would have lain in the first place. I wanted to dig a little deeper into the actual terror a typical abduction brings and what it does to the human psyche, and I thought the Hill case would be the perfect case to illustrate my points. Trust me, you're going to want to stick around for this until the end because it does get pretty wild. I want to dive into the memories that resurfaced for each of them, not only through the nightmarish and terrifying dreams they experienced immediately following their abductions, but also the actual nightmarish and terrifying memories dredged up when they were hypnotized. Dr. Benjamin Simon is the man who carried out the hypnosis on both of the Hills, and they were separated for each and every session. Let's start with Betty. The strange beings that took her and her husband had both she and him under their control using some sort of mind control tactics that we still don't really understand, not even today. Betty said that while she was under the control of the beings, she was laid out on some sort of operating table, and she was horrified to see these creatures inserting what looked like a needle into her belly button, her navel. Afterwards, they informed her that they were merely checking to see if she was pregnant, and then the being who did that assured her that the test would be very helpful, quote unquote, but it never elaborated, and no one was ever able to figure out what in the world it meant by that strange and seemingly bizarre statement. Betty said, quote, "It was a long needle. I would say the needle was 4 inches long, 6 inches maybe. There was a tube attached to it, and they didn't leave it in very long, just a second," end quote. Guys, this wasn't like when you feel like the pinch of a needle when getting a vaccination or getting some blood drawn. And Betty said that the pain was like what she imagined it would have felt like to have had a large knife plunged into her body, into her navel. Basically, it was excruciatingly painful. The entity carrying out the task was accompanied by another of the same creatures, and both of the Hills later on said that they thought this other creature was what they started calling the leader. And that's a quote. This leader was seemingly surprised and put off by Betty revealing that she was in excruciating pain, begging them to stop, and how she was expressing this, which was how most humans would have been at having a knife plunged into their navel, I'm sure. And so it took action. It helped her. It waved its gnarled hands over Betty's face and eyes, and instantly she felt no more pain anywhere on her body. But that's just what happened in her nightmares. That's not what happened during the hypnosis. Let's look at that same situation, but based on Betty's hypnosis memories. And just so you all know, I don't believe in hypnotic regression for everything. But in the case of this particular abduction in these two people, I've personally listened to the tapes and I find it all to be very reliable. And I believe in it wholeheartedly here. The pain didn't go away at all, and she was in fact deeply stressed and in agony throughout the entire procedure. This leads me to believe that during her nightmares, her subconscious mind attempted to place a more positive and much less traumatic spin on the whole ordeal in order to protect her from the actual stress of it. Once he realized how upset, terrorized, and traumatized, not to mention fearful, Betty was during the sessions, Dr. Simons halted the sessions for a few minutes, and he did so very quickly. Before I move further along, I think I've covered enough here on this channel about abductions and everything that comes along with them, all of the various types and possible reasons for them, that we can move into something called amniocentesis. Stay with me. So, when a woman becomes pregnant, the developing fetus is enveloped in amniotic fluid, which is very much just like a big old sack of water, but it's incredibly helpful and tells a lot about the health of the fetus and the mother as well. The two main things the procedure of an amniocentesis focuses on are alpha fetoproteins and the developing skin cells, and it's used to confirm the health and development of the fetus. Once again, I say stay with me here, because during this particular procedure, a needle is inserted into the mother's uterus via her abdomen, and it's usually done at between 15 and 18 weeks of pregnancy. This procedure is a bit dangerous. It isn't standard across the board, and it's therefore constantly watched by someone through an ultrasound. The goal of using the needle is to gain just a tiny sample of the amniotic fluid from the amniotic sac so that it can be studied and analyzed. So this risks popping the sac and loss or termination of pregnancy. That's why it's kind of, it's not a common procedure, and it's only done when there's high risk for something to be quote unquote wrong with the fetus. It's also used as a form of genetic testing, usually for muscular dystrophy, cystic fibrosis, or Downs. I'm not agreeing with amnios or any of that. I'm not making any kind of public political statement. I'm simply talking about what the scientific basis for this is. There are notable differences, though, between a human amniocentesis and what happened to Betty Hill. The needle in her case was put into her belly button, and for humans, it's into the abdomen to get to the uterus. Regardless of that, and all this to say, and because it made me think of the fact that it's astonishing to me that the extraterrestrial who put the needle in her navel told her it was to determine if she was pregnant. So skeptics like to talk about, in this case, how the first, amniocentesis were being done already. So it's not like it was a procedure that had never been done before, something futuristic that she wouldn't have known about it. They say that most people in Betty's position would have read about it in a popular magazine or in a medical journal. But if that was the case, and it was only her subconscious mind remembering reading something and then making up this whole scenario about an extraterrestrial giving her something similar to an amnio, as they're modernly called, then why would she have gotten it so wrong as to say that the needle was inserted into her navel? Keep in mind, guys, the subconscious is like soul memory, and it doesn't make mistakes. It doesn't forget anything and remembers everything exactly as it happened or as it really is or was, with zero exceptions. Now, there is something called a laparoscopy, which is when a small insertion is made into the stomach area and a lighted tube is inserted in order for doctors and surgeons to examine the pelvic area and pelvic organs. So, since the pelvic organs include the fallopian tubes, the uterus, the vagina, and the ovaries, a case can still be made that the procedure that had been performed on Betty was gynecological in nature, and it would be a very solid case at that, even if it wasn't an amniocentesis. Now that we've discussed one of the most significant procedures that had been carried out on Betty, let's move on to her husband, Barney. Once they were in the craft and he too was made to lie on some sort of uncomfortable and archaic seeming operating table, a tube was placed over his private parts. Whatever this apparatus was, it caused something to happen that I'm not sure I want to say here on my channel, but it's something men do at the end of intercourse usually, and the proper term begins with an E and a J. So we can infer here that the extraterrestrials wanted a semen sample or a sperm sample from him. After that, though, something much stranger happened in this case. One of the creatures very slowly and carefully ran its fingers gently up and down the entire length of Barney's spine. By the way, the creatures in question are normally thought to have been the large and bulbous-headed, diminutive, skinny, black-eyed alien greys, as we call them. But remember, too, that this is the first officially known alien abduction ever to happen, or to at least be publicized and widely discussed, so there was nothing to compare the creatures to at that time. However, the Greys were not the creatures responsible for this case. Betty described the beings as having pronounced foreheads, dark hair, and, quote, Jimmy Durante or Jimmy Durant noses, end quote. I had no idea who this Jimmy guy was, and I'm not even sure I'm pronouncing his name properly, as you can tell. But when I looked it up, it turns out he was an Italian singer who was actually known for having a huge, prominent nose. Barney Hill died in 1969, and it was really tragic because he was only 46 years old. Betty lived to be 85 and died in 2004. The reason I wanted to talk about them and what they seemingly went through is because I wanted to try to impress upon you the absolute terror and trauma most people experience during and after being abducted by freaking aliens. It isn't all fun and games, guys, and most people end up with PTSD and all other types of mental health issues, sometimes even physical issues as well. Whatever you all think about people who claim to have been abducted by aliens will be based mostly on your own beliefs, opinions, and life experiences, and I certainly am not trying to sway anyone one way or another. I wholeheartedly believe in most of the abduction stories I come across and bring to you all, but I also know there are many fakes and hoaxes roaming around out there too, because I've come across them constantly when I decide to do a video on this particular subject, and sometimes it's really hard to find one that is credible in my opinion. If you've had your own experience or know anyone else who has, please send those encounters to my email, because if you leave them in the comments, they will get lost. I have almost 2,000 videos on this channel, and there's so many people watching and commenting on so many different ones all day long and whenever that I don't usually see every single comment that comes in on a regular or daily basis. Let me know what you all think. As always, that's all I have for you today, guys. Please give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed the content. If you enjoyed one another's company if you watched in the premiere and if you enjoyed spending this time with me. Spread the love by sharing this video. Subscribe if you haven't already. Please, a lot of y'all that are watching are not subscribed. We just hit 4,000 subs, which is amazing. I remember just like scratching and crawling to try to get to 1,000. You guys are so tremendous. Please be sure to check out the description box for important links, how to donate to the channel, which is most of my pay. So PayPal, Cash App, my Amazon wish list, gift links, the schedule for the week for what I do on this channel, the live streams, the pre-recordeds, and anything else is also in the description box. And the links to the Kindle, paperback, and Audible versions of all of my books are also in the description box. If you'd like an autographed copy of any of my book titles, please email me, GemmaJadeParanormal@gmail.com. Also, send in your own encounters with the supernatural, extraterrestrial, otherworldly, paranormal, whatever the case may be, and I will use them in listener encounters. I really do appreciate it, guys. If you purchased any of my books in any format and haven't done so already, please go and give 5 stars and a positive review. Even if you just give 5 stars and write awesome book, it doesn't matter. It's the stars that really matter to me, and that'll keep my book, you know, kind of in the spotlight a little bit on Amazon. It's still at number 3. It was at number 1 when it premiered 2 weeks ago. So that is actually really good, and that is because of you guys. Gone Mysterious Disappearances Volume 2, where I look into somewhat famous cases and some more obscure cases of missing people who disappeared under very strange and mysterious circumstances in the blink of an eye in front of other people, whatever the case may be. But I am doing something I don't think many people are doing, and that's looking into a paranormal, supernatural, otherworldly element to these disappearances. So I just released Volume 1. Volume 2 will be out soon. I'm actually almost done with it already. Be kind to each other, guys. It doesn't cost anything. Be kind to yourselves and never accept anything less than others being kind to you. Please don't forget to support the shorts that I do here on this channel. If you have TikTok, go follow me over there. I haven't done much yet because I'm still figuring the app out, but I am going to bring Intuitive Oracle to TikTok. That's kind of what I'm going to do over there. Check out the shorts. I do Intuitive Oracle. I sing, I dance, I make jokes. I don't know. I aim to entertain with the shorts, and it's anywhere from like 4 or 5 to 60 seconds of your life. And it means so much to me, especially with the algorithm and with my channel. Remember, abundance is your birthright. Don't let anyone tell you you can't do something. If you put your mind to it, you can literally do anything. I believe in you. I got your back. Always go in grace. Smile at a stranger, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.